Snow fell like silence made visible. Soft, endless, and heavy with memory. Kilometres of empty road stretched beneath a grey sky in the Victorian High Country, where an Australian Army medic drove alone, chasing a place that no longer existed. Her only companion, a loyal Kelpie, eyes bright against the cold, seemed to understand the war still raging inside her. She thought the old cabin ahead was empty, just another ghost of her past. But behind its frosted windows, an 82-year-old woman kept a single porch light burning, waiting for someone who never came home. What she found inside would melt more than the snow. It would warm a soul long frozen by grief. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below. Snow blanketed the Victorian hills in a silence so deep it felt almost sacred. The air was sharp and thin, carrying the faint scent of eucalyptus and damp earth. Beneath the pewter sky, a single ute crawled along the narrow mountain road, its headlights cutting weakly through the storm. Inside, Kira Wallace kept both hands on the wheel, the muscles in her forearms tight beneath her jacket sleeves. She was 38, tall and lean, with a face marked by long winters and longer wars. Her hair, once dark, was streaked with grey at the temples. Her eyes were a cool hazel green, steady and alert even when nothing moved. Years as a medic in the Australian Army had carved her reflexes into precision. Now every gust of wind, every shifting shadow of a gum tree along the roadside made her body tense. A quiet, invisible flinch that came from surviving too much. The heater rattled faintly, doing little against the cold creeping through the windows. Beside her sat Dusty, a 7-year-old Kelpie with a dusty brown coat thick as armor. His muzzle was dusted with grey, his ears upright and still, his eyes bright amber and endlessly watchful. He had once been a military working dog, trained to track explosives and men alike. Now, like his handler, he was retired, though neither of them knew what that meant. Retirement, Kira thought bitterly, was just another word for being left behind. The road curved between snow gums heavy with ice. A wooden sign nearly buried in snow marked the turnoff to Patterson's Gap, a forgotten lane where her grandfather's old cabin waited. Kira hadn't seen it since she was 12. She remembered a veranda swing, a creek that froze hard enough to slide on, and the smell of pipe tobacco that lingered in every board. After her grandfather died, the family stopped visiting. Life, war, and duty had swept her away. Now with the army behind her and sleep nothing but a fragile memory, she had come back, hoping that the quiet might fix what years of noise had broken. When she reached the final bend, the storm began to ease. The snow fell in slow motion, soft as ash. The cabin appeared through the trees, its tin roof sagging under the white weight. The chimney stood like an old soldier, cracked but upright, and there, flickering faintly in the grey, was light. A small porch lamp burned behind a curtain of snow. Kira frowned. She had expected emptiness. Instead, the house looked lived in. Dusty let out a low growl, the kind that wasn't threat, but warning. Kira cut the engine, listening. The world went silent again, except for the whisper of wind across the ute's bonnet. She grabbed her gloves, stepped out, and sank ankle-deep into snow. The air bit at her skin. She scanned the ground the way soldiers do. Instinctive, methodical. There were footprints, small and uneven, leading from the woodshed to the door. Not animal, human, elderly maybe. The stride was short, one heel dragged. "Easy, mate," she murmured, her voice rough with the gravel of disuse. Dusty leapt down beside her, moving close to her leg, posture ready but calm. Together, they climbed the porch steps. Kira's pulse quickened. The windows glowed a soft amber and through the frosted glass she saw movement. The faint shadow of someone tending the fire. She knocked once. The sound was swallowed by the storm. Then pushing the door open slowly, she called out, "Hello?" The smell hit first. Baked bread, eucalyptus resin, and something old but clean, like time itself. A kettle hissed on the stove. The fire crackled in the hearth. And standing in the middle of the room, gripping a wooden cane as if it were a weapon, was an old woman. Elly Patterson was small, wrapped in layers of wool and faded plaid. Her silver-white hair was pulled into a loose bun, wisps escaping to frame a face lined deeply, but not unkindly. Her skin carried the soft amber tint of age, like paper that had known sunlight. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes, pale blue, clear as the ice outside, held steady. They were the kind of eyes that had seen both bushfires and winter, and decided to survive them anyway. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice quivering yet firm. "This is private property." Kira raised both hands, palms open. "Ma'am, I'm not here to hurt anyone. My name's Kira Wallace. This used to be my grandfather's cabin. James Wallace. I thought it was empty." Her expression flickered. The cane lowered an inch. James Wallace, she repeated softly, as if tasting a memory. Well, isn't that something? Dusty stepped forward, sniffing the air. Elly's gaze shifted to him, and something in her stiff posture eased. A Kelpie, she said quietly. I had one long ago. His name was Duke. He's Dusty, Kira said, kneeling slightly beside the dog. Trained partner. He won't hurt you. I can see that, she murmured, her tone softening. She studied Kira more carefully now. The military precision in the way she stood. The exhaustion in her shoulders. The way her eyes kept scanning the corners of the room. You've been a soldier. Yes, ma'am. Her grip on the cane relaxed completely. Then you understand why a woman alone in the bush keeps the light on. Kira nodded. I do. She looked around. The place was clean, too clean for abandonment. Quilts folded neatly on the couch. Dishes stacked in the sink. A small vase of dried wattle on the table. A radio sat on the mantel, humming a faint static waltz. Everything breathed quiet survival. I thought no one was here, she said finally. Most people think that, she replied, moving toward the stove with slow, deliberate steps. Your grandfather let me stay years ago when my husband passed. Said I could look after the place. Then he went south for his health and never came back. I just kept the fire going. Kira felt a twist in her chest. The old man had never mentioned her. You've been here alone all this time. She gave a half smile. Not alone. The bush keeps me company. The kookaburras laugh at me. The wind scolds me when I forget to close the shutters. She poured tea into 2 chipped mugs. You look frozen. Sit down before your bones protest. She hesitated, then obeyed. The chair creaked under her weight. Dusty lay at her feet, ears twitching, but calm. Elly handed her a mug, her fingers brushing Kira's briefly. Cold and paper-thin, but strong. The warmth of the tea spread slowly through her chest. For a moment, the storm outside felt distant, unreal. She glanced at her again, noticing the small details, the faint tremor in her left hand, the band of a wedding ring still indented, though long absent, the way her eyes darted to the window every few minutes as if expecting someone to arrive. You're welcome to stay the night, she said after a pause. That road won't be kind till morning. I don't want to impose. Nonsense. You're family by memory, if not by blood. Kira looked into the fire. Flames licked the wood in slow rhythm. She hadn't been called family in years. Something inside her shifted, a fragile, unfamiliar ache. Thank you, she said quietly. Outside, the wind picked up again, brushing snow against the windows. Elly adjusted the kettle, humming under her breath. An old tune, wobbly, but sweet. Kira recognized it faintly, a lullaby her mother used to sing. When she asked, Elly smiled. Your grandfather taught it to her. I wrote the melody. She stared, startled. You knew my family well. Elly nodded. Your grandfather saved my husband during the Ash Wednesday fires. He said, courage isn't loud, it's steady. After my husband died, I promised to keep this place alive for him. The firelight flickered across her face, softening the lines. She looked at Kira for a long moment, and then her voice gentled, low as falling snow. Seems the favors come full circle. What do you mean? Elly set her mug down, her smile sad and kind all at once. He saved my family once. Now you've come back to his house in the middle of a storm. Maybe it's my turn to return the kindness. Outside, the snow began to fall again, thick and slow, covering the world in white. Inside the cabin, the old lamp on the porch burned steady, its light spilling through the frost like a promise still kept. Morning came grey and heavy, the kind of light that never quite woke the world. The storm had buried everything in silence. Snow pressed against the windows of the cabin, soft as breath, yet strong enough to seal them in. Kira Wallace stood by the door, coat half buttoned, staring out at the endless white. The road had vanished beneath drifts as tall as fences. Escape was not only impossible, it was pointless. She rubbed the back of her neck, the old ache of tension returning. Behind her, the steady crackle of the hearth filled the air. Elly Patterson, wrapped in a thick wool shawl the color of smoke, sat near the fire, her hands busy kneading dough on a wooden board. Her movements were slow but practiced. There was a quiet grace in the way she worked, pressing and folding as if shaping something more than bread, perhaps shaping calm itself. Snow's got us trapped for now, Kira said finally. Her voice was rough from sleep, lower than she meant. Elly didn't look up. The mountain likes visitors who stay a while, she replied, her tone light, almost teasing. Besides, you look like a woman who hasn't had a real breakfast in years. Kira allowed a faint smile. Army rations don't count, I suppose. They count if they fill you, she said, dusting her hands, but they don't feed you. Dusty lay sprawled near the hearth, paws twitching in dreams. His chest rose and fell in a slow rhythm, the faintest whimper escaping now and then, a sound that made Kira's heart tighten. Even in rest, the old dog seemed to be guarding something unseen. The cabin smelled of rising dough and coffee. Kira had forgotten how human comfort could smell. She spent the morning patching leaks in the tin roof, tightening hinges on the door, and clearing the chimney flue. Her hands, once trained for sutures and tourniquets, moved with surprising steadiness over wood and iron. The sound of her tools blended with Elly's humming, a thin melody that wound through the room like a thread stitching two silences together. By noon, the bread had baked, the crust golden and cracked. Elly ladled vegetable soup into 2 bowls and set them on the table. Steam curled upward, mingling with the faint scent of thyme. Kira sat opposite her, uncertain whether to speak or stay quiet. Years in the army had taught her that silence could save lives. Here, it only reminded her how much of her life had been swallowed by it. "You cook like someone who's been feeding a whole platoon," she said finally. Elly smiled, lines deepening around her eyes. "Used to feed school children back when the town still had a school. I taught music, but the canteen always needed extra hands." "Music? Piano mostly?" she said, looking toward the corner where an old upright sat beneath a sheet. "Though my fingers have grown rebellious in my old age." Kira followed her gaze. The instrument stood solemn and patient, like an old friend waiting for someone brave enough to speak first. "What about your husband?" she asked softly. Her hands paused. "Robert Patterson, worked as a CFA volunteer after the war. Tall, quiet man, kind eyes, broad shoulders. He used to smell like eucalyptus sap and diesel. One summer, the Ash Wednesday fires came through. He went out with his crew to defend the town." Her voice faltered, the next words coming in a whisper. "They said the firestorm was faster than anyone expected." "I'm sorry," Kira said. She shook her head gently. "He went where he was needed. That's all any of us can hope for." Her gaze drifted to the window where snow pressed thick against the glass. "He told me once that saving someone doesn't always mean dragging them from danger. Sometimes it means giving them a reason to walk out of it themselves." Kira looked into her bowl. The soup was rich and simple, the kind of food that asked nothing in return. She thought of her own losses. Names on a memorial wall, faces fading in dreams. She had saved lives and lost them, often in the same breath. The thought made her swallow hard. Dusty suddenly stirred, ears flicking toward the door. His body stiffened, nose twitching. Kira froze. "What is it, boy?" The dog stood, tail low, muscles tense. He padded to the door and gave a single sharp bark. Kira pulled on her coat and opened the door. Cold rushed in, biting through wool and bone. Dusty bounded forward, stopping at the edge of the tree line. There, half buried in snow, lay a small shape, brown fur against white. Kira's medic instincts kicked in. She trudged forward, kneeling beside it, a young wallaby, its leg twisted awkwardly, caught in an old wire fence. Blood, dark and thin, stained the snow. The animal's eyes rolled weakly toward her. "Broken leg," she murmured, caught in the fence line. Elly had followed, wrapped in her shawl, breath fogging the air. "Poor thing, the winter's been cruel." "We can splint it," Kira said, scanning the ground. "I've got rope and wood." Together, they carried the wallaby inside, laying it on a blanket near the stove. The creature's chest rose and fell shallowly, its breath steaming in the warmth. Kira's hands moved with surgical precision, years of battlefield triage finding purpose again. She cleaned the wound, wrapped the limb, whispering instructions to Dusty, who watched intently, tail still. Elly knelt beside her, her movement slow but sure. She stroked the wallaby's neck, murmuring softly, words that sounded more like prayer than comfort. "Does this ever stop for you?" she asked quietly. "The need to save something?" Kira didn't answer right away. "If I stop, then everything I did before, everything I lost, means nothing." Elly nodded, understanding more than she expected. "When Robert died, I thought I'd lost my reason, too. Then a stray cat showed up in a storm. Half-starved. I fed it. It stayed. Sometimes I think God sends us these small tests to see if our hearts still work." Kira tied off the bandage and sat back. "You're saying this is a test?" "I'm saying," she replied, "if we still know how to care for something that can't thank us, we're not dead inside." The wallaby's breathing slowed, evened. Dusty circled once and lay beside it, his head resting near its flank. The sight stirred something in Kira. An old ache, but softer this time, like a bruise finally healing. By evening, the storm quieted. The world outside the cabin glowed blue and silver under the half-moon. Inside, the fire burned low, the air thick with the scent of soup and eucalyptus. Kira sat at the table, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee gone lukewarm. Elly sliced bread, the crust crackling beneath the knife. She handed her a piece, still warm, and sat across from her. They ate in companionable silence, the kind that no longer felt heavy. The wallaby slept near the stove, Dusty snoring softly beside it. The radio hummed a faint waltz, as if echoing the rhythm of two lives slowly finding alignment. Elly looked at Kira over her cup. "Your grandfather once told me something," she said. "He said, a person isn't truly home until they can sit down and stop carrying their weapons." Kira smiled faintly. He would have known. He did. She smiled back. "Now eat. Tomorrow's roof repair will need strong hands." The firelight painted them both in amber, flickering against the walls like memory reborn. Outside, the snow began again, soft, endless, and forgiving. Night in the high country carried a silence that pressed against the walls. Deep and ancient, the snow had stopped, but the wind still wandered through the gum trees like a restless spirit. Inside the cabin, the fire burned low, throwing a thin orange light across the wooden floor. Kira Wallace lay on the old sofa, the wool blanket pulled to her chest. Dusty slept nearby, his paws twitching as if chasing something in a dream. The only other sound was the quiet ticking of the clock above the mantel. A heartbeat for the house itself. Sleep came to Kira slowly, dragged down by exhaustion, but never fully peaceful. In her dreams, she was back in the dust of Taran Kaut. The air was thick with the smell of diesel and metal. The heat pressing down, shouts echoed in the distance. Men calling names, the whir of helicopter blades overhead. She was kneeling over a young soldier, a mate, his face pale beneath a layer of grime. She could see the panic in his eyes, feel the weak pulse beneath her fingers. She was working, fast, her medic training taking over. But the bleeding wouldn't stop. He said her name, just once, and then his hand went limp in hers. Then came the flash of light from a secondary blast, and the sound of the world disappearing. She jerked awake, drenched in sweat, breath shallow and ragged. The fire had burned low, the room faintly lit. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Her chest heaved, her hands shook uncontrollably. Then she saw Dusty sitting up, watching her quietly. The dog's ears were perked, eyes calm, head slightly tilted in concern. Kira pressed a trembling hand to her forehead, trying to steady her breathing. From the doorway came the soft shuffle of footsteps. Elly Patterson appeared, wrapped in her wool robe, hair untied, falling silver over her shoulders. The lamplight caught the hollows of her face, revealing the delicate strength of her age. Her eyes, pale and clear, saw everything, but judged nothing. "Bad dream," she said softly, not as a question, but a knowing. Kira nodded, voice barely steady. "Yeah, sorry I woke you." She moved closer, her cane tapping gently against the floor. "You didn't," she said. "The house did. It listens when someone can't breathe." She gave a short, broken laugh that wasn't really laughter. "That's poetic." "Poetry helps," Elly said, sitting slowly in the chair across from her. "What did you see?" Kira hesitated, eyes fixed on the dying fire. "Afghanistan. My team, we were on patrol. An IED. I was the medic. There was a young fella. I was supposed to fix him. I didn't." Her throat tightened. "I can still feel his hand in mine." Elly listened in silence, her hands folded in her lap. When she finally spoke, her voice was gentle, steady. "The dead don't call us to drown with them, Kira. They call to remind us they lived." She looked up, eyes rimmed red. "I wish it were that simple." "It isn't," Elly agreed, "but the dream doesn't kill you. It only wants to be heard." The room went still again, the wind outside whispering against the roof. Kira leaned back, exhaling slowly. For the first time, someone's words didn't feel like pity. They felt like recognition. After a while, Elly rose and laid a hand on her shoulder. Her fingers were light, fragile, but grounding. "Try again," she said. "The desert's gone now, only snow outside." Then she turned to the hearth, added another log, and stirred the coals back to life. "You can rest here as long as you need. The house doesn't mind." When she returned to her room, Kira sat in the dim light, Dusty resting his head on the soldier's knee. The tremors in her hands eased. She whispered something under her breath, a name perhaps, and stared into the fire until it stopped feeling like dust. Morning broke pale and quiet. Frost covered the windows, painting the glass in white lace. Kira woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Dusty scratching lightly at the door. Elly was already up, feeding kindling into the stove. Her shawl was draped over her shoulders and a small smile tugged at the corners of her mouth when she saw Kira. "You look better," she said. "Dream-free for once," she answered. "Then breakfast should hold," Elly replied, sliding a plate of fried bread toward her. After they ate, Kira pulled on her coat and stepped outside. The air was bright and clean. The sky stretched wide and cloudless. Snow glittered under the sun, untouched except for a few paw prints. Dusty ran ahead, barking once, a sharp, joyous sound that echoed off the gum trees. Near the edge of the clearing, a movement caught Kira's eye. The young wallaby they had saved was standing again, the leg bandaged, but firm. It moved cautiously, testing each step. Its fur shimmered in the morning light, and when Dusty approached, the animal froze for a heartbeat before relaxing. Elly joined her on the porch, leaning on her cane, her eyes softened at the sight. "Look at that," she whispered. "The world doesn't waste second chances." Kira watched as the wallaby took a slow, steady hop, then another. "Guess we didn't do too bad." Elly nodded. "My husband used to say that every creature that rises after falling is proof that something divine still watches us." She turned to her. "You talk about him like he's still here." Elly smiled faintly. "He is, just quieter." She looked at Kira then, really looked at her. "You remind me of him. You know, always building, fixing, saving something broken, except yourself." Kira met her gaze, unsure how to respond. Before she could, Dusty barked again, this time softer. The wallaby had wandered to the tree line and paused there, turning back as if to say goodbye. Then, with a slow grace, it disappeared into the bush. Elly's voice carried over the cold air. "See that? Even the wounded know when to keep moving." Kira's chest tightened, but it wasn't pain. It was something lighter, almost relief. She looked down at Dusty, who was staring at her with patient eyes. "Guess that makes 3 of us," she said quietly. They spent the afternoon repairing the barn's old door and clearing snow from the path to the well. Elly told stories about her youth, how she met Robert at a town dance in the 50s, how he built this cabin with his own hands, and how she stayed after he was gone because leaving felt like erasing him. She spoke not with sadness, but with the calm of someone who had made peace with time. When the sun sank, painting the snow in soft gold, they returned inside. Elly prepared stew. Kira cleaned her tools. The house felt warmer, fuller, alive again. As they ate, the radio hummed faintly in the background, static giving way to an old jazz tune. After dinner, Elly disappeared into the back room and returned holding something wrapped in cloth. "Your grandfather left this behind," she said, unwrapping a brass oil lamp. The glass was faintly smoked, the metal dull with age, but when she struck a match and lit it, the flame burned clear and steady. "I've kept it lit every night since he passed. Thought it might help him find his way home." She set it in front of Kira. "Now it's your turn to keep it alive." Kira hesitated, staring at the glow. "Why me?" "Because," Elly said softly, "you came back, and those who return deserve light." Kira reached out, adjusting the lamp's wick. The flame wavered once, then steadied, just like her breathing. Outside, the snow began to fall again, quiet and forgiving. Inside, the lamp burned on, its reflection trembling in her eyes. The storm had passed, leaving a hush so pure that even the gums seemed afraid to breathe. The morning sunlight spilled through the frosted windows, slanting across the floorboards in quiet stripes of gold. Kira Wallace stood at the bottom of the narrow attic ladder, staring up into the half-open hatch. The rope dangled like a forgotten memory. Elly had asked her earlier that day to check for a draft in the ceiling, but curiosity pulled her more than duty. She climbed carefully, each rung creaking under her boots. The attic smelled of cedar, dust, and something faintly sweet, old paper and time. The air was thick with the hush of things long kept secret. A single round window let in a pale beam of light, illuminating stacks of boxes and a trunk covered in a thin quilt of dust. Kira knelt beside it, brushed the lock with her glove, and found it already open. Inside were small keepsakes, a folded Australian flag, a framed black and white photo of a young man in uniform, and a stack of yellowed envelopes bound together with a faded blue ribbon. The handwriting on them was elegant but trembling, the kind written by someone who still believed words could cross oceans. She sat back on her heels, reading the topmost name, Private Daniel Patterson. Daniel, Elly's son. She unwrapped the ribbon and unfolded one of the letters. The ink had bled slightly, but the words were still clear. "My dear boy, the wattle is late this year. I keep looking for the first bloom like I used to look for your footsteps. I tell myself every morning that the mail will come, and when it does, it will carry your handwriting and the smell of the world you've seen." Kira's throat tightened. She turned to another. "Your father's tools are still in the shed. I keep meaning to oil them, but somehow it feels like touching them might erase what's left of him. If you come home, you'll find everything as he left it." She stopped reading. The ache in her chest pulsed like a slow drum beat. These weren't just letters, they were conversations that never reached their listener. The last one was dated 1972, 2 months before Daniel's unit vanished in Vietnam. Dusty padded up the attic stairs behind her. the boards groaning under his weight. The Kelpie sat beside her, tilting his head as if sensing his master's sorrow. Kira rested a hand on the dog's neck, the warmth grounding her. She kept talking to him. She whispered, voice cracking, even when no one wrote back. She didn't hear Elly's footsteps until she was already there. She stood in the hatchway, framed by the soft light, her shawl draped loosely over her shoulders. Her eyes went first to the open trunk, then to the letters in Kira's hand. She didn't scold or sigh. She only walked closer, each step slow but sure. I see you found them, she said quietly. I didn't mean to pry, Kira replied, guilt heavy in her voice. She waved a hand. If they've waited this long, they wanted to be found. Kira looked at her. You wrote all these? Every one, she said, sitting on a nearby stool. They kept me breathing when hope didn't. Some nights I wrote just to prove my hand still worked. Kira hesitated. You never got word about him? She shook her head slowly. Just a telegram that said, missing in action. They never found his body. But I stopped expecting miracles a long time ago. Kira swallowed hard. He looked like a good man, she said, glancing at the photo. He was, Elly replied, her gaze distant, stubborn like his father, too brave for his own good. He volunteered for the front lines so another boy could go home. The world doesn't make men like that anymore. Kira said nothing. She felt the words in her chest, heavy as the desert dust. Daniel's story mirrored the ghosts that haunted her own nights. The soldiers she couldn't save. The names she still carried like stones in her heart. Elly looked at her gently. You're thinking about your friends. She met her eyes. How could you tell? Because you look like a woman who still talks to them, she said simply, just like I talked to my boy. Her words hung in the air, fragile as frost. Then she smiled faintly. Go on, read one, he'd like that. Kira unfolded another letter, hands trembling slightly. I dreamed last night that you came home. The porch light was still on, and you laughed when you saw I'd kept your room the same. If dreams are all I have, I'll take 'em gladly. The silence afterward was deeper than any prayer. Downstairs, the door suddenly creaked open. A gust of cold air swept through the hall, followed by a man's voice calling, Aunt Elly? Elly's head lifted. That'll be Tom, she murmured, rising with effort. Tom Patterson entered the living room with a mix of impatience and charm. He was in his mid-30s, medium height, dressed in a dark wool coat and polished shoes that didn't quite fit the setting. His hair was slicked back with care, though the edges were beginning to thin. His face bore the kind of handsomeness that wilted under stress. Sharp jawline, tired eyes, forced smile. Aunt Elly, he said, dusting snow from his shoulders. You really should answer your phone. Been trying to reach you for days. I don't trust those machines, she replied curtly, moving toward the stove. They only bring bad news. Tom exhaled through his nose. Well, this time it's about the property. I've been reviewing the county records. Technically, this cabin's still under the Wallace name. Your lease was never updated. If it stays that way, the state could reclaim it under abandonment laws. Kira descended from the attic, her voice calm but firm. Abandonment? That's a stretch. Tom turned, sizing her up. And you are? Kira Wallace, she said, James Wallace's granddaughter. Something flickered in Tom's eyes. A mix of surprise and calculation. Well, that's interesting. Guess you've got as much stake here as anyone. Elly's expression hardened. Tom, this house has been my home for 40 years. Your uncle promised I could stay as long as I needed. I'm not disputing that, Tom said quickly, though his tone carried a lawyer's rhythm. But the rates are overdue. And I could help settle things. Get it sold, clear the books, maybe even split something between us. Kira's jaw tightened. So that's what this is about? You want to sell it? Tom's composure slipped for a second. Look, I'm drowning in debt. The market's turning bad. I'm just trying to stay afloat. Elly shook her head slowly. You can't sell what isn't yours, Thomas. Tom's voice rose. You think sentiment's going to pay the bills? The place is falling apart. Enough, Kira said, stepping forward. Her stance carried quiet authority, the kind born from years of command. You've said your piece, now leave before you say something you regret. For a moment, Tom looked ready to argue, but then he saw the look in Kira's eyes, steady, cold, and unyielding. He muttered something under his breath and turned for the door. The wind took it as he stepped outside, slamming it shut behind him. Elly watched the snow swirl in his wake, her expression unreadable. Then she sighed. Poor boy, he's not cruel, just desperate. Kira nodded slowly. Desperation makes soldiers of us all. Elly smiled faintly, though her eyes were wet. Your generation carried guns, mine carried letters. Both are heavier than they look. Kira met her gaze. You don't have to carry either anymore, she said softly. I'm here now. The lamp on the table flickered, its flame dancing against the glass. Elly reached out and steadied it, her hand trembling slightly. But sure, then let's keep it burning, she whispered. Outside, the snow began to fall again. Quiet, patient, endless. The days had grown clearer since the storm, though winter still held the high country in its long white grip. The morning sun fell pale and distant through the frosted gums, and smoke from the chimney rose into the calm air like a fragile thread. Inside the cabin, the warmth of the fire mixed with the smell of baked bread and cedar. Kira Wallace sat at the table, mending a loose strap from her pack, while Elly Patterson poured tea with careful, deliberate movements, her thin hands steady despite the cold. They had fallen into a quiet rhythm. She tended to repairs and chores. Elly cooked, talked, and sometimes hummed old hymns under her breath. It was the kind of silence that didn't need to be filled. The kind born from mutual respect and shared solitude. Dusty, the Kelpie, dozed near the stove, his body stretched long, ears flicking occasionally to the sound of crackling logs. When the kettle began to whistle, Kira rose to take it from the heat. You rest, she said, pouring hot water into Elly's cup. You've done enough this morning. Elly smiled faintly. If I stop moving, I'll turn into one of those wooden chairs. That's not how I plan to go. Kira chuckled, then looked toward the window where the sunlight touched the far edge of the yard. There's something behind the barn I want to check. Looks like a half-buried structure. The old storage shed, Elly said, her tone softening. Robert built it before Daniel left for the service. Haven't been in there in years. Kira pulled on her coat, whistled for Dusty, and stepped outside. The snow was deep but firm, crunching under her boots. Dusty trotted ahead, nose low, tail wagging lazily. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of eucalyptus and the faint echo of distant wind. When they reached the shed, Kira brushed snow from the doorframe and tugged the latch. It took a firm shove to break the frost seal. The door swung open with a groan. Inside, the light cut through dust and silence, revealing a clutter of forgotten things, rusted tools, a few wooden crates, an old rocking chair draped with cobwebs. But in the far corner stood something unexpected, a piano. Its surface was dulled by time, the wood dark and cracked, but the instrument retained a quiet dignity, like a veteran still standing at attention. A faded lace runner lay across the top, and on it rested a glass jar filled with long-dried wildflowers. Kira wiped a hand over the keys, revealing a soft gleam beneath the dust. When she pressed one gently, it responded with a dull, hesitant tone. Dusty tilted his head at the sound, tail wagging. Kira smiled. Guess it's been a while since anyone's played you. Huh? She called out. Mrs. Patterson, you might want to see this. A few minutes later, Elly appeared at the doorway, wrapped in her heavy coat, cane tapping the snow. Her breath formed soft clouds in the cold. When she saw the piano, she stopped short, her eyes widened, not in shock, but recognition. My word, she whispered. I thought that thing was gone. You knew about it? Kira asked. She stepped forward slowly, her boots crunching on the icy floor. Your grandfather gave it to me. Said your mother loved to listen when I played. I used to teach her scales after school. Bright girl, always humming. Kira blinked. You taught my mother. Elly smiled wistfully, back when her hair was in braids and she still thought the world was kind. She used to call me Miss Elly, no matter how many times I told her to stop. Kira laughed softly, the image of her mother as a little girl flickering in her mind. I didn't know she could play. She couldn't, Elly said, chuckling, but she loved the sound. She said it made winter feel less lonely. Her face grew thoughtful. After Daniel went missing, I stopped playing. My hands started trembling, couldn't keep a note steady. Kira looked down at her thin fingers. The veins faintly blue beneath pale skin. They're still steady enough to pour tea, she said gently. Maybe they remember more than you think. Elly shook her head, smiling sadly. Oh, Kira, some things aren't meant to be revived. But Kira wasn't convinced. This house feels like it's waiting for a song, she said quietly. Maybe it's waiting for yours. Elly didn't answer. She traced her fingers lightly over the edge of the piano, feeling the faint vibration still echoing from the key Kira had pressed. For a moment, her eyes shimmered with something between fear and longing. Then she turned and walked back toward the cabin, leaving the door slightly ajar. That afternoon, Kira cleaned the piano, removing dust and checking the strings. A few were broken, but most held firm. She tightened what she could and oiled the pedals. When she finally coaxed a short melody from it, a simple sequence of notes, the sound filled the shed with warmth. Dusty sat nearby, listening, his amber eyes following each motion as if the music itself was alive. As the day faded into dusk, The yard outside came to life. A shadow moved near the tree line. Kira stepped outside and saw them, 3 wallabies, moving slowly through the snow. The smallest among them limped slightly, its gait uneven but sure. It was the young one they had saved. Now it was leading 2 smaller joeys. Dusty remained still, ears perked but body calm. The wallabies lifted their heads, meeting his gaze, then continued on, passing just a few yards away. Their tracks left delicate prints in the untouched snow, trailing off toward the forest. The moment felt sacred, a breath of peace in a world that had forgotten gentleness. When Kira returned inside, the lamps were lit. Elly sat near the fire, her shawl draped neatly across her shoulders. The letters from the attic lay on the table, bound again by their faded ribbon. The air smelled faintly of lavender and bread. "You found your wallaby," she said, noticing the quiet smile on Kira's face. "They came back," Kira replied softly, not afraid anymore. "Maybe they remembered kindness," Elly said, eyes glinting. "That's rarer than fear these days." Kira hesitated, then gestured toward the window. "Come to the shed, Mrs. Patterson, please, I think you should hear it." Elly frowned playfully. "You're a stubborn woman, Kira Wallace." "The piano's worse off than me," Kira said. "It deserves a chance, don't you think?" With a sigh that was half protest, half surrender, she stood and let Kira help her with her coat. They walked through the soft snow. The night sky was streaked with faint stars. The shed glowed faintly from the lamp Kira had left inside. The piano waited, its keys gleaming pale under the light. Elly touched one carefully, the note echoing faint but pure. She closed her eyes, took a slow breath, and placed both hands on the keyboard. Her fingers trembled, first from age, then from memory. The first chord came out broken, uneven, the second, a little stronger. By the third, something shifted. The sound filled the air. Fragile but alive, she began to play an old lullaby, one she used to teach children decades ago. The melody wove through the room like smoke, soft and hesitant, yet full of truth. When she finished, the silence that followed was warm and full. Kira smiled, voice barely above a whisper. "This house just breathed again. You know that?" Elly looked down at her hands, still resting on the keys. "Maybe it wasn't just the house," she said softly. Outside, the wind stirred the snow, carrying the last notes into the night. The snow had turned soft, melting slightly under the touch of early March sunlight, leaving patches of brown earth exposed like the veins of an old map. The cabin stood quiet among the birch trees, smoke curling lazily from the chimney, a steady heartbeat against the stillness. Kira Wallace sat by the kitchen window, coffee cooling in her hands, staring at the frozen horizon without really seeing it. Dusty lay near her feet, tail thumping once, twice, before settling again. The dog's ears twitched every time the wind shifted, always alert, always listening. The phone on the counter broke the silence with its metallic ring. Kira hesitated, eyes narrowing. Almost no one called this number. She picked it up, voice steady. "Wallace." A pause, then a familiar tone, measured, firm, but carrying warmth beneath its gravel. "Captain Wallace, this is Major Will Travers. Thought you might have forgotten how to pick up a call." Kira blinked, leaning back in her chair. "Major, been a long time." 3 years, Travers said. "You dropped off the grid. No forwarding address. Figured you were hiding under a rock somewhere." "Close," Kira replied dryly. "Victoria." Travers chuckled, the sound edged with nostalgia. "Listen, Wallace, I'll get to it. We're putting together a training program for new medics at the Puckapunnel facility. Real instruction, not parade drills. You've got the field experience, the discipline, and the patience I need. It's not deployment, it's teaching." Kira exhaled, running a hand across her jaw. "Teaching," she repeated. "I'm not sure I'm the woman for classrooms." "You're exactly the woman for it," Travers said. "You know what it costs to come home. Maybe they need someone who will tell them the truth about that." Kira's silence stretched. Outside, the wind shifted, brushing against the windows like a quiet reminder of the world waiting beyond. Travers continued, "Softer now. You've got a month to think. The offer stands. You can train them to survive what nearly broke you." After the line went dead, Kira stood for a long moment, the weight of the call heavy in her chest. The army had been both a cage and a compass for her. She had walked away because she couldn't carry the noise anymore. But now the idea of leaving the cabin stirred something else, guilt for wanting peace when others never got it. Dusty rose, sensing the change in his master's mood. The dog pressed his head gently against Kira's leg. Eyes patient and knowing, Kira knelt beside him, fingers brushing through the thick fur. "You think I'm meant to go back, huh?" Dusty huffed softly, tail wagging once. "Yeah," Kira murmured, "me neither." The door creaked open just then, and Elly appeared, wrapped in her wool shawl. Her cheeks were flushed from the chill. Her silver hair gathered loosely behind her head. "You look like a woman who just read bad news," she said. "Not bad," Kira answered, "just complicated." Elly set her basket of firewood down and sat across from her. "Complicated is another word for life still wants something from you." Kira smiled faintly. "They want me to teach. Back at the base." Elly studied her for a long moment, eyes soft. "And do you want to go?" "I don't know," she admitted. "I used to live by orders. Now the silence gives me orders of its own." Elly reached out, laying her hand over Kira's. Her touch was light but sure. Sometimes staying put is the hardest command to follow. Before she could respond, there was a knock at the door, urgent but not unkind. Kira frowned and stood. Dusty was already at attention. Ears perked. When she opened the door, she found Tom Patterson standing there, snow clinging to his coat and hair. He looked thinner than before, his sharp features drawn by exhaustion. The confident spark in his eyes was gone, replaced by a weary humility. "Tom," Elly said, surprised, "you'll freeze out there. Come in." He stepped inside, holding a folder of papers close to his chest. "Aunt Elly, I need to talk to both of you." Kira gestured toward the table. "You'd better sit." Tom hesitated, then sank into the chair opposite them. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the folder, spreading several documents across the table: deeds, signatures, and legal notices. "I was wrong," he said quietly, "about the property, about everything." Elly tilted her head. "You found your conscience?" He gave a humorless smile. "More like I found the bottom of my mistakes. The company I was working with, they weren't buying land. They were laundering money through it. I signed on to help broker deals, thinking it was clean. When it all fell apart, they left me holding the debts." Kira leaned forward. "So now you're here to fix that by taking this place?" Tom shook his head. "No, I came to tell you I can't. Legally or morally. The papers I brought before, they were void, lies dressed as business. I wanted to sell the property, clear my name, made me feel like I'd done one thing right. But when I saw you here, when I saw how alive this place was again," his voice faltered, "I couldn't do it." Elly's expression softened. "You were scared. Desperation makes fools of good men." "I'm not sure I was ever a good one," Tom said. His gaze fell to his hands. "I just want out of the hole I dug." She reached across the table, her old fingers brushing the edge of his sleeve. "The house doesn't want money, Thomas. It just needs someone who remembers what warmth feels like." Tears glistened briefly in Tom's eyes, but he blinked them away. "I'll find a way to make things right," he said hoarsely. "I promise." Kira nodded, voice even. "Start by forgiving yourself. The rest will follow." Tom stood, tucking the papers under his arm. "You should know, Wallace, there's a quiet kind of strength about you. My uncle would have liked that." Kira smiled faintly. He had good taste. When the door closed behind him, the wind swept in briefly, carrying snowflakes that sparkled against the firelight before vanishing. Elly sighed. "That boy's lost more than he admits." "Then maybe he needs a place to find it again," Kira said. Elly nodded slowly. "Perhaps. But tell me, what about you? Are you leaving?" Kira didn't answer right away. She looked toward the lamp on the table. Its flame steady, unwavering. The piano in the next room stood silent, but not forgotten, as if listening. Later that night, the moon rose high above the forest, casting silver light across the snow. Kira pulled on her coat and stepped outside, Dusty padding beside her. They walked toward the tree line, where the world grew quiet except for the soft crunch of their steps. The air was sharp but clean, each breath a ribbon of fog. She stopped near the ridge, gazing at the valley below, kilometers of untouched snow and shadowed gums stretching as far as the eye could see. The phone call, the past, the ghosts, all of it pressed in on her, but not with pain, with purpose. Dusty stood close, his breath misting in the moonlight. Kira rested a hand on the dog's neck and whispered, "Maybe this is the order I was supposed to follow all along." The wind shifted gently, carrying the faint scent of eucalyptus and smoke. In the distance, the cabin's window glowed like a beacon in the dark. Kira turned back toward it, the decision already made in her heart. "This is home now," she said softly. "We're staying." Dusty's tail brushed the snow, slow and steady, as they walked back under the quiet moonlight. Evening settled over the valley in long amber streaks that faded slowly into blue. The snow outside glowed faintly beneath the rising moon, and smoke curled from the chimney like a thread of memory. Inside the cabin, warmth spread from the fireplace, carrying the smell of pinewood and roasted vegetables. The table, though small and worn, had been set carefully. 3 plates, polished cutlery, a simple candle flickering between them. Kira Wallace had even found an old linen cloth in one of the drawers. yellowed by time, but clean. She smoothed it flat with her hand, as if the gesture itself could make the night more perfect. Dusty lay near the hearth, his body stretched long, his dusty brown coat glinting in the firelight. His head rested on his paws, eyes half closed, but alert to every motion. The dog had a way of being calm and protective at once. A soldier's discipline softened by a creature's grace. Elly Patterson was in the corner, her posture straight despite her 82 years, her silver hair tied neatly in a low braid that rested against her shawl. She was tuning the piano, pressing a key and listening closely, her ear tilted to the faint vibration. Her hands trembled slightly, but there was focus in her gaze, the quiet determination of someone who had learned that perfection mattered less than sincerity. From outside came the sound of tires crunching on snow. Kira turned toward the window and smiled faintly. "That'll be Tom," she said. Elly didn't look up. "He said he'd bring the bread. Let's see if he remembered." Moments later, the door opened, letting in a rush of cold air and the smell of night. Tom Patterson stepped in, carrying a brown paper bag tucked under one arm. He had cleaned himself up since his last visit, his dark hair combed back, coat buttoned, the faintest sign of hope returning to his eyes. Still, the lines of worry clung to his face, etched deep like scars of invisible battles. "I come bearing bread," he announced lightly, shaking the snow from his boots. "And maybe a peace offering." Elly smiled, her eyes crinkling. "You're forgiven, Thomas, but I'll still decide if the bread's worth keeping." He laughed softly and placed it on the table. "Fair enough." Kira poured him a cup of coffee, the dark liquid steaming in the firelight. "You made good time," she said. Tom nodded. "Roads were clear, and well, I didn't want to miss dinner." His tone carried more than politeness. It carried gratitude. The three of them moved easily through the small rituals of the evening. Kira ladled stew from the pot, rich with potatoes, carrots, and venison that Elly swore tasted better than anything store-bought. Tom sliced the bread, passing it around with careful hands, as if afraid the moment might shatter if he moved too quickly. For a while, conversation hovered over ordinary things: the weather, the coming thaw, a story about Dusty chasing a squirrel and losing interest halfway through. Laughter came quietly, naturally. Then Elly rose slowly and moved toward the piano. "I think the time's right," she said. "If we're going to eat like family, we might as well sound like one, too." Kira helped her to the bench, her touch gentle but firm. The firelight danced across her face, revealing the years written in the soft folds around her mouth, the faint scars of old labor on her hands. She took a deep breath, placed her fingers on the keys, and began to play. The melody that filled the room was an old one, haunting yet tender, a hymn she'd once taught to children long ago. The notes were uneven at first, hesitant, but then they found their rhythm, weaving through the air like smoke from the hearth. Tom sat still, eyes glistening. Kira closed her own, letting the music settle into her like a prayer. When the final note faded, silence took its place, thick and luminous. Elly turned slightly, smiling. "There," she said softly, "it remembers me after all." Tom leaned forward, his voice husky. "That was beautiful, Aunt Elly. My mother used to sing that when I was little. I haven't heard it since." He trailed off, his words dissolving into the crackle of fire. Elly reached for his hand. "Forgiveness doesn't erase time, Thomas. It just lets it breathe again." Outside, Dusty stirred suddenly, ears lifting. Kira followed his gaze to the frosted window. In the dim light, shapes moved near the tree line. Graceful, deliberate, the wallabies had returned. The same mother they had once saved stood just beyond the porch, her breath rising in faint clouds. Two joeys beside her, their eyes caught the reflection of the fire, twin amber sparks against the night. Elly's gaze softened. "Even the forest knows peace when it sees it," she whispered. "Nature forgives easier than we do." They stood together for a moment, three people bound not by blood, but by something quieter, understanding perhaps, or shared loneliness turned into companionship. The wallabies lingered for a few breaths more before turning back into the dark, their silhouettes vanishing like blessings given freely. When they returned to the table, Kira filled their cups again, this time with a splash of brandy she'd found in a dusty cabinet. "To second chances," she said, raising her glass. Elly lifted hers with steady hands. "And to the fools brave enough to take them." Tom chuckled, clinking his cup gently against hers. "I'll drink to that." They ate the rest of the meal, surrounded by stories, Elly recalling her youth, when dances were held in barns and letters took weeks to arrive. Tom talking about city life before it unraveled, and Kira sharing fragments of her service. Never the battles, but the quiet moments in between, the sound of boots on sand, the stars above foreign seas. The mates who taught her what courage really meant. Laughter returned, small but true. It filled the spaces where sorrow used to live. As the fire burned lower, Elly excused herself briefly, disappearing into her room. When she came back, she carried a small brass key tied with a piece of faded ribbon. Her steps were slow, but her eyes shone clear and steady. She stopped in front of Kira and pressed the key into her palm. "This belongs to you now," she said. Kira frowned slightly. "What's this?" "The house," she replied simply. "If one day I go where my hands can't reach and my memory can't find its way home, you keep the light burning. Don't let this place go dark again." Kira looked down at the key, then back at her, her voice low. "As long as that light's on, you'll still be here." Elly smiled, her eyes glistening with firelight. "Then I suppose I'll never leave." Tom watched them both quietly, a small smile touching his lips. Dusty stretched by the hearth, his tail thumping once against the floor before he settled again, the sound as soft as a heartbeat. Outside, the moon climbed higher and snow began to fall again. Light, peaceful, endless. The cabin stood against the night, its windows glowing like lanterns of forgiveness in a world that had nearly forgotten how to forgive itself. Spring had returned to the high country with the kind of quiet grace that only old lands know. The snow still clung to the shadows of the pines, but the streams had begun to murmur again beneath the ice. Wild geese traced slow arcs across the pale morning sky, and the cabin stood just as it always had, sturdy, patient, its windows glinting gold when the sun rose over the ridge. A year had passed since that winter when everything changed. The seasons had rolled over the valley, each one leaving its own mark, and yet the rhythm of the place had remained simple. Each morning Kira Hayes rose with the light, brewed her coffee, split a few logs for the stove, and walked with Dusty through the woods where frost met moss in soft silence. Dusty, now grayer around the muzzle, still carried the same steady energy. His amber eyes missed nothing. When he ran, the snow bent under his paws like a promise. Sometimes he would stop, nose high, catching the scent of wallabies, or perhaps only of memory. The house was filled with small traces of Elly Patterson's life. The piano remained in its corner, covered with the lace runner she had once refused to throw away. Her teacup still sat on the shelf above the sink, next to a small tin of dried lavender. The key she had given Kira hung by the door, tied to the same faded ribbon. Kira had thought about painting the porch, maybe repairing the roof, but every time she began, she stopped. She couldn't bring herself to change what already felt like perfection, the perfection of something lived in, worn, but whole. It was on a crisp March morning, almost a year to the day since that dinner by the fire, that the letter came. The mail truck rarely ventured that deep into the woods, so the sound of its horn startled her. The driver was a young man, barely 30, with freckles across his nose and a friendly smile. His name tag read, "Ben." "You're Ms. Wallace?" he asked, handing over an envelope. "Registered mail, looks official." Kira nodded, signing the slip with the steady hand of a woman used to responsibility. "Thanks, road's all right today." "Better than last week," Ben said with a grin. "You've got a good spot up here. Quiet." "Yeah," Kira replied softly, glancing back toward the cabin. "It's quiet." When she opened the envelope inside, her breath caught. It was from a law office in a nearby town. Inside was a handwritten note on thick stationery, folded neatly around a smaller envelope marked, "To Kira. From Elly." She sank into the chair by the fire, Dusty settling beside her, head resting on her knee. Kira unfolded the lawyer's note first. The words were formal but kind. Confirmation that Elly Patterson's will had been finalized. She had passed away peacefully in her sleep 2 weeks earlier at her niece's home. She had left few possessions, but one thing of true value, the cabin. Attached was a notarized document that traced ownership all the way back to Kira's grandfather. In the margins, written in Elly's delicate cursive, was a line, "He once saved my husband's life. I suppose it's only fair that his granddaughter saved mine." Kira's eyes lingered there for a long time before she turned to the smaller envelope. The handwriting on it trembled slightly, but it was unmistakably hers. She broke the seal, unfolded the letter, and read, "Dear Kira, if this reaches you, it means I've gone where no winter can reach. Don't grieve long. I had more years than most, and each one was a borrowed gift. I'd rather you keep the piano tuned than the flowers on my grave. You brought laughter back into this house. For that, I owe you more than words. You reminded me that forgiveness doesn't arrive all at once. It drifts in like snow until everything harsh is covered in light. This cabin is yours now. Your grandfather once told me that homes are not made from wood and nails, but from the people who refuse to leave. You've earned it by staying when you could have run. If there is a heaven, I believe it has music, soft snow, and a woman who once learned how to remain still. I will see you there someday. But not yet. Until then, keep the porch light burning. Someone lost might still need it. With love. Elly. The paper shook in her hands. She read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it back in its envelope. The fire popped in the hearth, filling the silence with a tender rhythm. Later that evening, Kira stepped out onto the porch. The same porch where she had once found Elly standing with a lantern and suspicion in her eyes. The world was quiet again. The gum trees gleamed faintly in the pale light, and the air held that unmistakable scent of thawing earth and eucalyptus sap. She reached up and lit the old porch lamp. The bulb flickered once, then steadied, casting a circle of amber light that spilled softly across the snow. Dusty sat beside her, watching the tree line. His breath rose in faint clouds, ears pricked toward the darkness. Then, just as the wind shifted, Kira saw them, the wallabies, 3 now, standing near the edge of the woods. The mother, regal and calm, and her 2 nearly grown joeys. They moved slowly through the clearing, unafraid, their tracks silent against the frozen ground. Dusty didn't bark, he merely watched, tail still, eyes bright. Kira felt a deep calm settle in her chest. Looks like they made it, she murmured. The dog gave a quiet huff, as if in agreement. Kira leaned against the porch rail, the wood cool under her hands. The stars had begun to appear, faint silver dots scattered across the velvet sky. Somewhere far off, an owl called, its voice echoing through the valley. She thought about the offer from Major Travers, still unanswered after all these months. Maybe she'd write back, maybe not. For the first time, it didn't matter. The silence no longer felt like a cage. It felt like belonging. Behind her, through the open doorway, the piano stood waiting. She could almost hear the faint echo of Elly's fingers on the keys. The melody she had played that night, a tune that had outlived its notes. Kira smiled faintly, a rare, unguarded expression. You were right, Mrs. Patterson, she whispered. This place doesn't need guarding. It just needs someone who listens. Dusty shifted closer, his body pressed lightly against Kira's leg. The soldier reached down, resting her hand on the dog's head. Come on, boy, she said softly, let's keep the light on. As the wind rose again, the lamp's glow shimmered through the falling snow. The house stood firm, its windows glowing like quiet promises. Dusty's eyes caught the light, reflecting it back in twin golden sparks. From the distance, the cabin looked almost like a painting. A woman, a dog, and a porch bathed in warmth against the vast cold of the night. The porch light still shone. The snow fell softly, and somewhere in that golden circle of peace, a soldier who had once been lost finally found where she was meant to stay. In the end, this story isn't just about a house or an old woman or a soldier learning to stay. It's about grace, the kind that doesn't come in thunder or lightning, but in quiet moments when the light refuses to go out. Maybe that's how God works most of his miracles. Not by changing the storm, but by sending someone to keep the lamp burning until it passes. If you've ever felt lost, if you've ever needed a sign that home still exists, look for the light that never stops shining. Sometimes it's in a stranger's kindness, sometimes in the loyalty of a dog, and sometimes it's right there inside your heart, waiting for you to believe again. Share this story if it touched your soul. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. And subscribe if you believe that even in our darkest nights, God still sends small miracles to guide us home. May He bless you and may your own porch light never go out.